Thank you for choosing to attend this session. Tea is still an hour away, but I do hope to make this session as interesting and as useful to you as well. Thank you for choosing to attending this session. I represent Similia Trading and Consultancy Private Limited. Based in Bangalore, we focus on high-end training and consultancy in the areas of technology and management. I'm going to talk about Windows Server AppFabric, downloadable, free, available on Windows 7 as well as Windows 2008. And it provides application infrastructure features for on-premise services. There is an AppFabric on the cloud also, but I'm going to talk about on-premise AppFabric. Well, why do we require it? And I would like to debate about this from a developer's perspective. Then we will look at the architecture and go down to features on hosting, persistence, monitoring, and caching. And last but not the least, how AppFabric handles the different non-functional requirements, the abilities as we call them. AppFabric is all about configuration, so I'm not going to show you much of code. It's more of showing you how to do it. So I would rather like to focus on scenarios wherein you can use these features effectively. And if you have any questions in between, just raise your hand and is it possible to reduce the intensity because I can't see them? A little bit, this one, because there's a tremendous amount of glare on my eyes. Thanks. Very philosophical question. What should be the developer's job? Any answer? Coding. Okay, coding what? Developing what? Right? Problem solving, developing, right? Ideally, all of us should spend our time on development. Developing something that is of business value to the users, to our clients, isn't it? But is that what we are doing? If we actually look at it, we seem to be, the context here is the middle tier, so we should be writing more of business logic, isn't it? But is that what we really do on a day-to-day basis? Don't we do some amount of deployment, some amount of code related to monitoring, some amount related to configuration management? How many of you are doing like this? And of course, we do development of business logic also. How many of you feel that way? This is what I'm doing daily, day in and day out. Okay, most of us. Now, I'm going to give a quote from David Chappell. He says, a cardinal truth about software development is developers should not write code for application infrastructure. Whatever support services they require, their software requires, should be provided by the underlying platform. And this is the only way developers can focus on adding value to their customers. That means 100% of the time they do business logic development only. Now, with this statement in mind, let's look at the current status of affairs in Microsoft platform. How many of you are working on .NET 4.0? Almost all of you. WCF services? Great. Workflow services? Workflows? WF? A little less, right? Okay. Now, you know about the two great pillars of .NET 4.0, WCF and WF. There's a lot of synergy between them in .NET 4.0. They have been merged beautifully. So, if you have your software as a service exposed because of WCF, and it gives you interoperability benefits also, but when the client makes a call, what happens is a long-drawn, time-consuming business process should be invoked. And there comes your workflow foundation. Right? It gives you workflow foundation from 3.5 to 4.0 has undergone tremendous amount of changes. It's a radical rewrite. It provides a lot of features. You can create asynchronous logic. You can have transactions, both short running and long running. You can create bookmarks. Quite a lot of compensations, exception handling, quite a lot of rich features. So you get the best of both worlds. WCF on the outside and WF on the inside. And that is what is called as workflow services. Ideally, as a developer then, in the middle tier, we should be creating only workflow services, right? But we don't seem to be doing only that. We encounter a lot of problems. Well, I wrote the workflow service, but it's not easy to get started. I need to plan about configuration. I need to plan about how to host it. WCF and WF do not mandate what kind of a host we write. We can even write a console application. But for a production environment, writing a very decent, effective host is not an easy task. Right? So I would rather like to have the server handle it rather than it becoming my responsibility. Even if I get it running, how do I instrument? How do I get a peek? How do I get a comprehensive, deep insight into the working of my service, whether it is running okay or if there is some problem that I encounter. Both cases, I would like to track what is happening. Well, some amount of tracking is definitely provided by workflow services, but then the tracking data is written into, you know where? It's written into event log. Now, that's not going to help us. We would require something much more enterprise kind of a feature than that. Next. Well, in 3.5 itself, we did have some amount of tools for scripting, administration, etc., but we would require something better than that. Last, very important, even if I can handle the other 3 points, how do I handle the abilities, the so-called non-functional requirements? What we mean here is, how do I meet the service level agreements that I kind of committed for my workflow service? For 50 users, it's working well. 500 users, right? How do I scale up effectively? How do I take care of abilities like response time, 24/7 availability, reliability, performance, all these factors? How do I handle them gracefully? Now, which means what we are looking for is, out of the box, we require support for configuration and hosting, good monitoring, tracking, not based on event log, but database based, and good dashboard and scripting support. Dashboard so that you get a good UI, and as an administrator, I can see what is happening to the running workflow instances. And abilities, out of the box, we do want support for performance, persistence, availability, reliability, etc. Rather than we having to worry about all of them, can we have app server support out of the box? Where is the app server in the Microsoft environment in .NET 4.0? That's the question, ultimately, the whole thing summarizes it to be. And the answer is provided by Windows Server AppFabric. Let's look at the architecture. It's very easy to understand. Windows Server AppFabric is not something revolutionary in nature. It's evolutionary. It's built on top of the current IIS WAS combination that we have. It helps you to host, configure, and manage both WCF services, that is pure WCF services that you write, or workflows which are exposed as services, which are nothing but workflow services. And so it's built on top of IIS WAS, and it works with .NET Framework 4.0. It provides runtime database support for persistence and monitoring. And it provides very good features for hosting, monitoring, caching, and persistence. We'll take a look at these features in this session. And it also provides extensions to IIS, wherein you can get a very good GUI. It provides a dashboard. And if you want to have a programmatic control to do all of these, to manage hosting, monitoring, etc., you have the Windows PowerShell commandlets. These can be created, these can be used directly on your command line, or you can embed them and write a custom admin program. Okay, so let's look at these features one by one quickly. IIS and WAS combination provided us 2 features of auto start. We could do an auto start at app pool level, or we can also do an auto start at application level. Now, AppFabric extends it. It says, I'm going to provide you auto start feature at a service level. So one or more services within a web application can be marked for auto start. Now, this reduces the latency for the very first message, because what was earlier provided was on-demand activation. Now you have auto start. So the service is up and running and initialized before the very first call. So even the first call is very fast. And now, since it is auto-started, you no longer require to write listener adapters. We used to write listener adapters for WAS. Whenever for non-HTTP protocols, you no longer have to write that. The key scenarios would be when a computer has to be rebooted, you don't want to start your service through an admin program, auto-start will help. Or protocols like WS Discovery Announcement require, they make it mandatory that the service is always running. So this feature comes in handy. Or you want a service to get started, read a database, do a lot of number crunching, create a lot of data, and put it in a cache, right? So even before the very first message comes up. So these are some of the scenarios wherein it becomes very useful. And if you worked on BizTalk server, you would know that a BizTalk server receive location can be configured as a WCF service, and that always takes time to create, to kind of get initialized, because you have the process creation, app domain creation, the host creation, and you also have BizTalk reading a lot of configuration files and so on. So when a BizTalk receive location is exposed as a WCF service, again AutoStart comes in very handy. And AutoStart also comes in handy in cloud-based scenarios. When you want to expose a WCF service endpoint to the Windows Azure service bus, AutoStart becomes very useful. Now what I'm going to do is take a very simple scenario so that we can run some demos and then I can showcase the AppFabric features. The flow is very simple. It's a mortgage request application. So the customer provides the mortgage request details and we do some kind of a screening and if there is anything incorrect we tell him, but we can also reject it at our end due to some initial validations. But once we approve at our end, we are going to send it to 3 vendors on a sequential basis. That's our business policy. Any one of the vendors, if they say okay and if they return us a positive interest rate, we say the loan is approved and we save it in the CRM. We expose the result to the customer. But it's quite possible if one vendor rejects, then we go to the next vendor and so on. It's a very simple logic. And of course, what is not shown here is that at any point of time, the customer can query the status of his mortgage request. The solution has been created as follows. You have the front-end application, which is an ASP.NET application, looks at the mortgage application as a WCF service. As I said, it is WCF on the outside. So you have a WCF service client proxy. You send a message. And that kickstarts a workflow here, and with all the features like persistence, tracking, etc. configured. And whenever we want to talk to 3 different vendors, the vendors are 3 external web services. And whenever we want to write to the CRM, CRM is also being modeled as an external service. So our own workflow itself is a service to the external world. And in turn, we are consuming services from the vendors as well as CRM. Is that okay? So that I thought that this kind of an example is enough for me to showcase the AppFabric features. Let me just run this for you. I'm not going to run validations, etc., because my interest is not in, my focus is not on showing you the workflow features. So I'll just show you the happy path. It says it's been forwarded, and at any point in time, I can kind of get to know what is happening. It goes to vendor. Each vendor, I have put a random number generation to generate a negative number or a positive number with a 10-second delay. So vendor 1 seems to have rejected. It goes to vendor 2, vendor 3 also, because vendor 2 has rejected. Okay, I just need to run this. Okay, fine, no problem. It has been rejected by everyone. Now let's go to IIS. Once you have installed AppFabric, as I said, it's downloadable free. You get an AppFabric dashboard, you see here. And the configuration can be done at 4 different levels. You can do it at machine level. You can see this. Manage WCF services. You can do a configuration, monitoring, workflow persistence, host management, throttling, security, etc. One could also do the same thing at a site level. So this is the convenience I'm just showing to you before going into details. Custom. So you enable all the services will auto start, disable no services will auto start, and so on. And of course, you could do it at service level also on the dashboard. I can see my service and I can specify all the details. And of course, you may be wondering if there are conflicts at different levels, what happens? All the configurations are merged, and whenever there are conflicts, the ones which are at the lowest level will prevail. That means what is at a service will prevail over what is at application level and so on. And since I have run it on the dashboard, I should be able to see it. So if I kind of refresh it, so take a look at the dashboard. This is very easy to create. The reason being the monitoring and the persistence are both stored in a database. So one can create a custom dashboard as well. So you have general filters which are available, time-based filters, and you can see workflow instances, the call history, and this was the service which I ran in the last 15 minutes. You can see that. And for this, you can look at all the events which are tracked and so on. Okay. So this is very cool and easy to get started with. Let me showcase the details as we proceed. Let's look at persistence. It is persistence which makes a workflow durable. Very important. Without persistence, you can't have durable workflows. Now, what you would want is a workflow usually works in bursts. So it does some work because of getting some stimulus from environment, and after that, it's waiting for some more stimulus from the environment, or it is waiting for an event to happen internally. Whatever happens, at time t0, it might have accumulated some state, but it's idling in memory. Now, you don't want it to be idling in memory. You want to optimize the memory usage. So you would like to kind of serialize the state of the workflow in a persistent data store. And as and when that event arises or the stimulus arises, you want the instance to be recreated and resuming from the persistence point. And I hope all of you are familiar with this kind of a persistence. Now, AppFabric out of the box supports SQL Server based support, and you could also create a custom store. Very easy. All it requires is a connection string and a configuration at the dashboard level. So let me show you only the scenarios here. The scenarios are persist before reply. Now, if you have worked on workflow services, it gives you templates like receive and send. So I receive a call from the external world, then the workflow does some work, accumulates some state, but before sending, you would like to persist the state. So you might want to do a persist before replying. Or at some point in time, very consciously, you want to do a persistence of the state created so far. So you have a persist activity itself. Or the workflow may be waiting, as I said, for some external stimulus. Classic example is a receive activity. So whenever it is idling, you would not want it to be in the memory. You would like to unload it and store the data in a database. And the next 2 points are very important. The workflow instance is running fine, but the machine has crashed, or just the host on which it is running has crashed. So if the machine has crashed, then when the machine comes up, or you would want AppFabric to run it on a different machine. Okay? So the workflow should be resumed from the persistence point, maybe on the same machine if it's a host crash, or on a different machine if it is a machine crash. In fact, a very important point that comes in mind here is that the workflows no longer have any affinity towards the host or towards the machine in which they are running. So that is possible, made possible by AppFabric. The last one is, many a time we do take care of exception handling. You have try, catch, throw, all these are activities in the workflow, but there could be some unhandled exceptions. So when there is an unhandled exception, but it is recoverable, right, the instance gets aborted. So probably it calls for administrative intervention to kind of correct the error, and again you would like to resume from the persistence, from the persisted state. So these are all scenarios where persistence comes in very handy. Another scenario where persistence is important is correlation. Correlation and persistence go hand in hand. What is correlation? First, somebody adds an item. Okay, there is a receive shape in my workflow service. User ID is 3. Then it does some work, and then the data is stored. At some point in time, when somebody wants to view the data, there's another receive, because that's another WCF call for us. Internally, it's mapped to a receive activity. Then the correct appropriate workflow instance must be picked up from the persistent database, isn't it? There are a lot of instances, but the right one, here it is correlation is based on the content, which is user ID equal to 3. Okay? So persistence and correlation go hand in hand, and correlation keys are also kept in the persistence store. What you need to do is, the configuration is very simple, I'll show it to you. Decide how many persistent stores you require. There is no rule here. If you have 10 services, each one of them could use a different persistent store. That means a different database. Or all 10 of them could use the same SQL Server persistent store also. That's up to you as a configuration. Check whether the SQL-based instance store is required, right? Will suffice for you. That is what is available out of the box. Suppose you say my organizational policy is that I must use only Oracle database, etc. So you might want to create one, or you might want to buy a third-party instance store. That is also possible, and it can be plugged in. And all you have to do is configure the persistence and whether you want to have instance control in AppFabric. Let me just show it to you. The persistence and the instance control in action. For this, what I'm going to do is, you know, the vendor service is an external service, because I want to show you instance control. I can't have my host crash or machine crash happening here, but I'll show you the instance control I can show you. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to stop this. Okay, vendor service is stopped. All right, now before that, let me also show you the configuration details. So easy it is, so easy, so intuitive also. So all you have to do is specify what the workflow persistence is, give the connection string. The connection string itself is specified at the service level. And this is all you need to do. You need to do if you are using the SQL store. Custom, you have to specify. And in the case of host management, whether you want instance control or not. Instance control means when the workflow is suspended, it can be resumed, it can be cancelled, it can be terminated. So do you want to have such a kind of administrative control over the instance? So whether enable instance control, yes or no. Whether instances have to be unloaded when idle, and what is the timeout. Instances should be persisted when idle, the timeout. Both you can specify. The subtle difference between unload and persist is that there is a similarity. Both of them, it will get persisted. But in the case of unload, the instance also will be knocked off from memory. In the case of persist, when persist instances when idle, it will be persisted and it continues to remain in memory. So you can kind of use these parameters and tune. And action on unhandled exceptions. This is what I was talking about. So you can suspend it or you can cancel, terminate, etc. In my demo, I want to show a resume. So I have done an abandon and suspend. Okay, that's what I have done. Let me just run this. Okay. Very consciously, I have put up a service wherein I'm not handling this exception. So now I'm starting the Modgate service, but you know the vendor service is not working. I've stopped it. So it says there is no pending request. Actually, the trouble is, the problem is seen here. You can see that here. And I see in the dashboard, it's reading from the database. You can see that. It takes some time. So let me just. It's not recovered, it says. Let me see the persisted instance. I've set persistence yes. So you can see this suspended. And now this resume, cancel, terminate, etc. is enabled because we did an instance control as yes. Okay? And whatever I'm showing right now can also be done through PowerShell commandlets. They can be done through command line or they can be embedded in a program. Commandlets are extremely easy to use. And before resuming, I must start the service, right? I think I didn't start this vendor service. So let me just it is started now, but I need to resume. So I'll just go over here. Right now I have only one machine, but the dashboard can show me data of workflow instances which are running in multiple machines also, if you have a farm kind of a scenario. And whatever administrative commands like this are given for instance control, they are all queued up and they get executed. Just can't see here. Just yeah, I'm going to resume this. You can see the status. Since it's a little slow, I can see that. See, there is a pending command. It's placed in a queue. But let me see. Yeah, it's now resumed. Now it goes through the regular route. Okay, vendor 1 is rejected. Okay, so this has been completed. So if I now refresh, it should say it's completed. Okay, you can see that it's completed successfully. So I hope you got an idea of workflow persistence and instance control, how they go hand in hand. The next important feature is when our application is running, we would like to track effectively and get a deep and comprehensive insight into how it is running. So monitoring is very important. It gives us a peek, a visibility into our currently running services. Questions you may ask are, yeah, my application is running fine, but how well? You're more interested in the health of the application, even though nothing is going wrong. And of course, when things go wrong, really, we want to know why. Is it because of performance? Is it because, where is the bottleneck? Which activity is failing? Which call is failing? And so on. We would like to troubleshoot. These are two aspects of monitoring. It can also be based on business analytics. For example, if I write an approval application, which is a workflow, for every approver, I would like to know how much time was taken. So it's kind of, there is some business meaning to the tracking that you are giving. So you can collect business analytics. Or you can also say, how long does the credit appraisal workflow take to complete? One workflow instance, how much time it takes to complete. Then the whole data is going into the monitoring store, which is SQL based. And hence, you could do a lot of analysis using SharePoint or using SQL Server. You can get a very jazzy UI for your tracking, much better than what you get in the dashboard. Look at the monitoring architecture. It's again based on the enterprise tracing for Windows, the ETW. ETW was there way back in Windows 2000, but it underwent a radical architectural change from Vista onwards. It's based on the PubSub architecture. The publisher here is the workflow or the WCF service, and the tracking participant is the subscriber. So the tracking participant subscribes for events. So what are events? They are, in the case of pure WCF, it will be analytical events. If it is a workflow service, then you call them as tracking records. But then so much of data is emitted out, you do not want everything for your service. You would like to filter out and say, this is the kind of data that I would like to track. So what you do is you create a tracking profile, which is part of your configuration. It's an XML file. You create a tracking profile and specify that these are the specific instances, specific events I would like to track for my workflow service. So based on that, the tracking participant collects the data and writes it into an ETW session. So till this point, it is your ETW architecture. Now comes AppFabric on the other side. You have AppFabric, when you install AppFabric, it also installs a Windows service, which is called Event Collector Service. So this keeps polling the session, and it writes into the monitoring database. Out of the box, it is based on SQL Server, and you could have some other kind of persistent store also. For example, if you want file-based persistent store, you could have it. Because it is based in the database, it's very useful. You could use Excel, you could use SharePoint, you could use SQL Server, and you can create very effective monitoring tools by reading the data. I hope the architecture is clear, the monitoring, how it happens. What you have to do is that AppFabric gives you some 4 or 5 monitoring levels. I'll show them during the demo. So you have to decide which level is appropriate at different point in time, development time, production time, staging time, troubleshooting time, and so on. And definitely, you're expected to create a tracking profile for your service. You don't want everything. You would like to customize and say, this is what I would like to have. And this is not something static. You can change it anytime you want. And if you have tracking records, WF defines some predefined tracking records. But you could also create your own custom tracking records also. User-defined events you can emit into the session. And if you want to track certain data while a particular activity is being monitored, you can define your activity variables and activity arguments. It's very easy. And last but not the least, that's a very important feature. Many a time you may say, tracking is all fine, but I would, because that is going to dump a lot of data in the monitoring store, but I would like to get one row, one record for every workflow instance. What is that one row or one workflow instance should get, right? What was the interest rate, how much time it took, or who were the approvers who rejected, any kind of an information, business information that you have for your workflow instance, but on a per row basis. That means one row per workflow instance. You don't want to be bombarded with a deluge of data for tracking. So you could use promoted properties for that. Let me show you all of them quickly. In fact, I don't even have to run this because I've run this many times. So I'll just quickly go over to IAS. I'll just show you what you need to do. Very simple. All you have to do is the configuration. And you can see the monitoring here. Right? The different levels that I talked about. Obviously, off means you don't want any instrumentation at all. You're just, everything is running fine, but you don't want to have anything, no metrics, nothing. Right? Errors only Only errors and warnings I want. I don't even want to collect any metrics which will get populated in the dashboard. This is also okay for very stable applications. But typically what is recommended by Microsoft is health monitoring level. It gets all the, some amount of lightweight data, lightweight events it collects, errors only level, errors and warnings, but it also populates certain metrics that you can see in the dashboard. This is the preferred one for the production environment. But of course, things go wrong, then you want to get a deep insight. So you can have what is called end-to-end monitoring. This gives you, this traces the entire chain of calls. Your workflow service receives a call, in turn it talks to another WCF service, right? In turn again it talks to another WCF service and so on. So all those linkages you would like to create, you would like to kind of monitor, you configure end-to-end monitoring. In fact, you can write a, you can do a rehosting of designer host in WF. You can reconstruct the entire history of your message flow if you track it at end-to-end monitoring level. But obviously there is a cost involved, too much of data is collected and it will hit your performance also. And really in troublesome situations, you would go into troubleshooting level, lots and lots of data, even small things are captured. And as you can see, even here itself Microsoft has given highly verbose and may impact the performance of your server. So this has to be done only in extremes when things really go wrong and you want to kind of find out, troubleshoot what exactly is happening, okay? But otherwise, usually it is health monitoring. Okay, since I've run some services, I'll just show you the tracking and I'll map it to the tracking profile that I created. You can just see this. This was the one which I aborted, resumed, and then it completed. So let me just show you here, view tracked events. As I said, this data simply gets into a SQL Server database. So you could create a much better Jassy UI using pie charts and all those stuff using SQL Server or SharePoint, you could have it. So you can see there are different kinds of tracking records you can create. For example, you can see here, the workflow instance record, which stays when it got completed. This is completion. This is start. And we also aborted, right? There was an unhandled exception because the vendor service was not running. So that error is also captured here. Or I would want to capture details at an activity level. So I have an activity called ask vendor 1. And I would like to get the details here. And I would also like to track certain application specific data here. For example, mortgage request was rejected, or it was accepted, what was the interest rate, and so on. So you might want to do that. And I want you to see something else also here. And you can put a filter. As you can see, maximum items is 500. That's what I'm doing. And I can view related items. I've also created a user-defined event for this workflow. I'll just show you here, and then I'll map it to code. You can see here, there is something called about to send to vendors. This is a user-defined event. This is not given, this was created by us. You can see here, there is something called payload. I want you to see this. I've captured the customer ID and possibly the amount, okay? Now let me go back to this code and show you the relation. Everything is, there is hardly any coding here except for user-defined events. So you have the configuration file. All you have to do is create a tracking profile. You can see here, you give a meaningful name for it. And you say, what is it that you are interested in? And there are different kinds of predefined tracking records available. So you could, this is what I was doing. Started, completed, aborted, unhandled exception. These are the workflow instance statuses I wanted to handle, track. And you can also see that I wanted to handle that ask vendor 1 whenever it is closed. And I wanted to track this variable called result. Result is whether he is approving or rejecting, etc., etc. So now if I want to do for ask vendor 2, I just have to copy paste this. So I can create activity state queries, custom tracking queries, and so on. Is this okay? So all you have to do is look at the schema that is available for the tracking profile, decide what you want to track, right? And this is what I want. You have to specify, and then you have to put it in the config file. And I also showed you that you can create custom events you can emit out. What exactly is the architecture here? It's very simple. If you have understood that ECF, we saw that based on the pub/sub architecture, your workflow service is emitting certain events captured by the tracking participant, and it is going into the session, isn't it? From there, it is going into the database. What you have to do is, there are certain pre-configured events which you subscribe for in your tracking profile, and you can also say, programmatically, my service itself would emit events. And these events again will get written into the session log. From the session, it goes into the monitoring data store. That's all you need to do. You have a event provider class which is provided in the framework for that. And I've created a wrapper around it to make things easy for me, WCF user event provider. And you can see here, all you have to emit, whenever you want to emit data, so all you have to do is, write error event, write information event, write warning event, etc., etc. And you can see here, this is the payload. What I took was customer ID and house value. This is the data that I want to capture, and I would go to. So you can give any business value, business meaning to tracking by capturing the appropriate variables. So even for predefined records, you can capture data. You can also emit your own custom tracking records. It's very simple and easy at different points in time. Last but not the least, I was showing you that you would like to not do tracking, but collect business analytical data, one set per workflow instance. Let me show that to you. I need to run this. So I'll just run this once. It's going to take some time, so hopefully I should be able to go quickly to SQL Server and show it to you. Okay? So I just want you to focus on the last one because there's quite a lot of data here. This is the G3. You can see here there is a start and there is a time. This is one row. Every time the workflow gets persisted, the first time it gets persisted, a row is inserted, and every time there is a persistence happening, this row gets updated. This is very important. So what happens is exactly one row per workflow instance. And how much you can store? You have, I think, about 64 values you can store. So you can give business meaning to these columns and say that for every workflow, I want to capture some 64 different types of data. So you can do that. And let me just show you here if it's over. Doesn't matter, get rejected or not. This will take some time. Hopefully it has got updated. Let's see. So you can see here it's completed. And here I'm tracking the amount of time it takes, amount of times in milliseconds or seconds or whatever you want to take. Whatever you want to capture, you can capture. Now the way this is built, I want you to note that this is a feature of the SQL Server instance store, the persistence instance store. This last demo that I showed, the data is not going into the monitoring store, it is going into the persistence store, and lot of rows are not added, one row per workflow instance. 64 different pieces of data you can have. For this, what you need to do, you have to write some steps. You have to create a custom behavior, then you have to configure the web.config file for that, and then you write what is called as a participant properties behavior, wherein you say this is the data that I would like to capture, and on top of it you can create an activity, you can plug it in wherever you want. So from this point to this point I want to know how much of time it took or what happened, etc. So you can plug in that custom activity anywhere and then you can proceed. There is a nice article which tells you step by step, some 7 or 8 steps you need to do, but it's very useful because you can really capture very customized business data specific for your workflow. That is promoted properties, a feature of the SQL instance store. So let me proceed. Caching is such a big topic, it requires almost 3 sessions for me to explain the caching architecture, but I'm trying to do justice in 3 minutes, 3-4 minutes, that's all I have. All of you are familiar with session data, right? If you're writing ASP.NET applications, where do you keep your session data? In memory, right? In memory. But if you have a kind of multiple copies of your ASP.NET applications running on multiple servers, and you have a load balancing scenario. So the request can come to any machine, isn't it? Then where do you keep your session? Right? You have to keep it only in database. But then that's more of, sorry? Yeah, you keep it in the persistent store. You can't keep it. So you change. But then that defeats the purpose because you want to get very fast access to it, and it is in a database, you know how time consuming it is. So what you want is a load balancing scenario, multiple copies running, and yet data should be present in memory, and you don't want it to be present in database. So an in-memory cache, but distributed. That's very important. In-memory distributed cache for any kind of data, any CLR object can be stored there, serialized and stored. Rows, XML, binary data, anything. But as far as the client is concerned, client means what? Your ASP.NET client application which writes session.write if you say, or session of, and then you say key value pairs. You don't care where the data is going, and you do not know in which mission it is going also. So what you have is a unified access, unified logical one single view of cache. If you have used the cache class in ASP.NET, you have cache.get, cache.put and so on. No? So same way you use it. But where the cache data is going, you can configure a suite of servers. It's called a cache cluster. It can go into any one of these cache missions. And of course, on your mission where your ASP.NET application or workflow is running, you could also have a local cache. Okay? So it's very rich in features. I'm not going to go deep into them. But scenarios I'll explain. What you need to do is classify your data. 3 kinds. Unchanging data accessed by multiple clients. Any example you can think of? Hardly changes. Accessed by multiple clients. Catalogs, right? That is reference data. You might want to keep a local copy in it because you want to get fast access. Okay. Read-write data, that means changing data, but one copy for every single client. Classic example is the one I gave, session data, your shopping cart data. It's one for each workflow instance or one for each client. It is not shared, but it is read-write. You can keep it in the cluster. Resource data, changing read-write, accessed by multiple clients. Any example you can think of? Like auction data, reservation seat arrangement, multiple clients need to see, and multiple clients will update also. So you keep it in the cache cluster, but then, you know, if one person is accessing, then the other application should not access. So you need to have concurrency control mechanisms. Now, caching architecture allows both optimistic concurrency and pessimistic concurrency features, and you could use them, okay? But also you have to examine your requirements. It's so rich in features. Is latency very critical, very fast access? You don't want to have multiple hops. Then you say, I would keep it in the local cache. Is the data secured? Very important credit card data. I want to keep it in the cache, but I can do a digital signed and digitally signed. Encrypted data can be kept in the cache. Is the data evictable? Like in your cache class in ASP.NET, you can create policies for them. Can staleness of data be tolerated? Suppose I am keeping a local copy in my mission. The original is the latest one is in the cluster. How frequently my copy should get refreshed? You can specify. Last but not the least, very nice feature, should cache data survive mission failures? Because you are talking about a set of missions. In memory, the data is distributed. But it's quite possible, mission doesn't have to crash. It's quite possible that the administrator wants to bring the mission down for preventive maintenance or whatever, maintenance purposes, okay? So if you want the cache data to survive mission failures, this is called a high availability option. You can turn it on, and what happens now is 2 copies of the cache data is kept. There's a primary copy and a secondary copy. So these are all some rich features available, but you use them whenever, whatever you want. How AppFabric handles the abilities. Now I'm going to summarize here in terms of how abilities are handled, because many of the things we can handle, but the abilities are difficult. Scalability, performance, response time, etc. Let me show you the features. Auto start boosts the performance, startup performance, because even the very first message is going to be serviced fast. Persistence gives you reliability, as I told you, long running workflows. And we also saw that recovery from crash. If the host crashes or if the machine crashes, your workflow is not, it doesn't have any affinity with the host or the machine. Then if it is persisted, then the persisted state can be recreated. The workflow instance can be recreated from the persisted flow, persisted data, and it can run on another machine. So totally your workflows are host agnostic and mission agnostic. That's availability, right? And also it improves scalability because you can have any number of copies of your workflow instances running without bothering about this affinity related features. Affinity related bottlenecks, not features. Caching. You know, caching improves performance. We all know that. But look at other features. Now, a suite of machines are there, so you can scale them up without, you know, your client application worrying about it in any way. So you can have your business logic in multiple machines. That means multiple copies of your workflow instances running, and you can have cache placed in the cache cluster. And as I told you, last one, high availability option, if it is turned on, then you are guaranteed that you have the copy of the cache always available, and it survives machine crashes. So what is the takeaway now in terms of the complete picture? As I said, AppFabric is freely downloadable. Please try it out by downloading it in Windows 7 and Windows 2008. You might be in a scenario where you are writing only WCF services or only WF workflow services, or a combination, doesn't matter. I'm giving the complete picture here. Let me explain. Consider an online shopping application. So you have multiple users, very high volume. So you have your front end, let's say ASP.NET applications working on working behind a load balancing scenario. Multiple copies are running. So if you have your session data, any data that you want to cache, you could use the AppFabric caching services, the cache cluster. Once, let us say, the shopping cart is created, there is a workflow for your shopping, the order to be processed. So it could pass on to a set of workflow services. And all these workflow services also, multiple copies may be running on different machines. And they also can make use of the caching services. Anybody, any .NET application can make use of these caching services. So together you get the best of all the worlds in terms of using caching feature as well as the hosting management and tracking features. So to summarize, coming back to, I think David Chappell's words are coming true, at least in .NET 4.0 onwards, in Windows 7 in 2008, we don't have to write code for application infrastructure. So once you have AppFabric installed, you can use any one of these. And one important point to note is you're not forced to use all the features. You can use only hosting, but not persistence. You can use only monitoring and caching, but not the other features. So you can choose which feature you want, and you can add them incrementally and make life really easy, because at the end of the day, we would like to have focus on only adding value to our customer, focusing on writing business logic. Is okay? That's the purpose that is the app server support. So I complete my session here. If you have any questions, I can handle them. Yes, please.
Let's say if we have a workflow solution
Yeah.
On the older version,
and
now we want to migrate
yeah.
How
Wait. First, even without AppFabric, I will first answer this question. Usually we talk about the word interop, you know, when there is a big change from one version to another version. But WF 3.5 to WF 4.0 is interop. There is an interop assembly actually there. So if you want to run in an as is where is condition all the 3.5 features, because WF 4.0 is a complete rewrite. So for some of the features of 3.5 which are not supported in 4.0, you will have access via interop. So you have to bring and compile your applications, because the AppFabric support is available only on 4.0. So you have to make it as a 4.0 service. So you may completely rewrite it, or you may want to use the interop route. I would say interop route is better. Why do you want to rewrite? For example, if you have used rule engine has not been natively written for 4.0. It's available via the 3.5 interop only. So you could use it, but all your services, WCF and WF services, have to be compiled on 4.0, because AppFabric support is available only from 4.0 onwards. So your Visual Studio compilation once is required. Is that okay? There are two parts to that. 3.5 to 4 is a big change. Any other questions? Please.
Do we have AppFabric supporting the cache refresh?
In what?
Cache refresh. For example, I update my catalog.
Yeah.
And do we have the option of that triggering some event which will update the cache?
Yes, notifications. You have notifications on the caching architecture. Once you receive a notification that the data has changed, you can take whatever action you want.
Okay.
That's available as part of the caching architecture. Any other questions?
This AppFabric server
I'm new to the fabric actually. This is the first session I'm hearing.
Uh-huh.
Is this installed on the cloud or it will be different?
No, I made it clear. There is a confusion here. There is an AppFabric on the cloud. Okay, that is different. But there's an AppFabric caching on the cloud. So I'm not talking about Windows Azure. The session itself was for on-premise services. That means leave cloud apart, okay? You're talking about your own workflow services or your WCF services that you are writing on premises. So this one that I talked about is Windows Server AppFabric for on-premise services. Unfortunately, there is a confusion. There is an overlapping features also, but this one is downloadable and usable for on-premise services. Is that okay? Please don't mix it with Windows Azure. There could be some features overlapping, like caching is there also. But that is cloud, and we are firmly on the ground. That's not cloud. We are within our own organization. No cloud here, although the name is same. Any other questions you have? Right? If you have any other questions, please access me, meena@simindia.com. You will get definitely a reliable reply. May not be very high response reply because I keep doing programs, but definitely a reliable reply you will get. And thank you for choosing to attending this session. So I hope you got a good idea of what AppFabric is all about. Just download it, try it out, and use it. Any feature you kind of want to use, one by one you can try, and you can see whether it makes sense and whether what David Chappell said, whether it is really true or not, you can validate. Okay? Thank you, and I'll stop.